they'll have like obviously like they like they Googled the answer and they put in a like they just copied and pasted something. Like it's so like evident, like you weren't and it a lot of times doesn't even have anything to do with what I just talked about. So if you're listening, ladies, don't do that. Pay attention to this. Yeah, I know. Some people could probably just like push play, go off and play a video game, come back, it's been paused, right? Then Google it real quick. Yeah, you can tell. You can tell. Okay, so remember that in general, there's a shortage of people willing to work in factories because most people are farmers. But there is one pool of people that seemed to be available to work in factories for Lowell in Massachusetts, and that were farm girls. Now, here I have farm girls who are economic liabilities to their parents. Now, in one way, I guess maybe I should rephrase this because it almost reduces some women down to like money figures, and that's not what I intend. But this is the way that some people thought about these ladies back then. Can you translate that phrase? They were economic liabilities to their parents. You're right. You're on the right track. Because there's nowhere for them to work. You just don't work outside of the home. You might have like a home industry, maybe. Like there were a lot of people like in England, especially women who were like the beer makers before like Anheuser Busch became before alcohol became like a big business, right? Um, but it's not like there's a lot of blacksmiths not going to take them, right? Or a mason, right? So you're on the right track. Yes, they have to pay everything, but why? What's their marital status? Yeah, they're single, right? Back then, if you're single and you're a woman, where do you live? With your parents. See what I mean? You have to pay for everything for them, right? So basically, we're talking about all the single ladies, to quote Beyonce. Nothing, not even a smile. There was a masked smile right there. Okay. In other words, single women who haven't been married yet, living with their parents, right? Relatively good wages paid to these girls who went to work there. They were also very sheltered because they were female, and we've got to protect the women, right? Very closely supervised. No men allowed in the dormitories at night, etc. And yes, they were housed at the Lowell Mills too. And basically, what we have with the Lowell system is that there is more profits being made because there is not a middleman. There's not a middle step in that, like there was in the Slater system. So basically, by the time we get to the Civil War, the cost to produce a yard of cloth goes down 14 cents per yard, which basically means that clothing can now be afforded by the average person. That they don't have to make it themselves. They can go out and buy something already tailor made. Look at the manufacturing of the country. If I was going to ask you before, could you have guessed that the one region where the manufacturing didn't really take root was the South? Right? It spreads westward, mainly concentrated in the north, but it does spread westward a little bit, even to close to where we are. But there's very little in the South. Singer and Howe invent the sewing machine. That improves textile production even more. Raw cloth can be produced faster and cheaper, and therefore the price lowers. That increases the availability of the market. So that means more people can be sold to that can actually purchase it. Does anybody's grandparents or maybe even parents have an old Singer sewing machine? They're probably foot pedal, right? Those are the kind of things we're talking about. If you have one of the now, there are antique Singers that are machine like electric powered too. But if you have one of those foot powered ones, that you should keep that in your family because that's worth something. I think I could be wrong, but now beforehand, the labor management relationship went something like this: Dad teaches son how to farm, or blacksmith takes on apprentice and teaches the apprentice, or the mason takes on an apprentice, teaches the apprentice, and it's almost like a father-son relationship. It is very close, right? You know the person that you're training. You know them pretty well because they're working side by side with you, and one day they're going to take over your position, right? When we go to the factory system of labor, what we get is a big reduction in that relationship between the boss and the worker. And imagine if you were a mason, a stone mason, and you are building a stone house, and by the time you're done, like how much pride you would feel in doing that yourself, right? How much pride do you feel at the end of the day as a textile worker if you spun 20 yards of cloth? Maybe a little, but not as much, right? Because you don't own the product. It's somebody else's that you're making it for, right? It's not for you. And it doesn't really, there's not this opportunity to build, make a lot of wealth out of what you produced. And what we get as well is professional management. Foremen on the factory floor. And their job is not to know you as a person. Their job is to, quote unquote, crack the whip so that you can get working faster and you're not as, distracted. So you're not really working alongside of your boss anymore. You're a cog in the system, I guess, is one way to put it. In essence, then labor becomes a cost of production. It's not a relationship anymore between two people. It's you now are a kind of like almost a nameless face, and you're just paying you digs into our profits. And so, in order to get more profits, one way to help get more profits is to pay you less, right? Because you're a cost of production. Horace Greeley. Now he's going to be somebody who'll pop up here and there. He'll run for president. 72, I think. He is an abolitionist who is extremely, very much against slavery, like radical. Like he even criticizes Abraham Lincoln for not being radical enough, right? And here he's making some comments about just what it was like to work and survive in come on in a factory life, in factory life. So I told them, if you need to chat, just take the posters out into the hallway and work on it. Otherwise, you can stay in here if you can be quiet and work. He's saying that the average family would have needed in 1840 about $10 a week to survive, and the average male made $5 a week. So you need an extra $5 a week. What does that mean then? If your family is going to survive, what do you have to do? What has to happen? Yeah. Either the man has two jobs, which at this point is pretty impossible because you're working 10 to 12-hour shifts, right? Or if dad doesn't work two jobs, then mom and kids have to work. And women and children start to become favored by factory owners because you can pay them less wages. Well, we can pay the woman of the house less wages because she's not the man of the house, right? She's not the head of the house. And we can pay children less because they're just little tiny humans, right? And they don't deserve as much money because they're definitely not head of the household either. In 1820, almost half of the workers in Connecticut were children, the industrial workers. In Rogues Island, over half were children. Now, this is just a place to drop this in because there's nowhere else I can really talk about this. This is not a Supreme Court case. This is a Massachusetts state Supreme Court case. Not that federal Supreme Court, the Massachusetts state Supreme Court. And there were, as you can imagine, early labor unions that wanted to. I haven't seen Caitlin's eyes the entire. There she is, right there. The unions who wanted to, strengthen numbers, band together, and so on. And there were a lot of bosses who said, "No, you can't do that because you are prohibiting the production and so on and so forth, especially if you go on strike." And so there was one Supreme Court case in one state that said we are okay with labor unions, and that was Commonwealth versus Hunt, 1842. That was an exception to the rule. Early labor unions were pretty much frowned upon. Do you want to guess what gender made up the first labor unions, really? The first, effective labor unions? It was the women at the Lowell Mills. FYI. Okay. It was a necessity. Hi.
Hey.
What's up?
Well, proposal there's.
Yeah, please. I'll let them start writing this down. Okay.
There isn't a class in the gym ninth period. You can set up some tables.
Oh.
Create a little space.
Is that okay? Coach Evans is okay with that, and you're okay with that?
Yeah, I'll set him up in there. He's out of the field, I'll say, for ninth period. So.
Yay! Thank you. That might look better for the superintendent's coming, and she might like that because it looks more COVID friendly.
Yes, that's I figured there would be.
Right.
You want to notify your class.
Okay. Appreciate it. Do you hear that? You all back there, meet here, and then we'll take all of our stuff down, and we'll go to it'll be fine. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Okay. The agricultural revolution was necessary to have an industrial revolution, and I would also argue that it was necessary to have a transportation revolution in order to have an industrial revolution. But the industrial revolution was also necessary if there's going to be urbanization and so on and so forth. So all that it all kind of is this one big mess, right? It's all together. What was the first national panic? The official name of it. The first national economic recession. It's in there. It's in there somewhere. I promise. There you go, the Panic of 1819. Now, there's going to be one about every 20 years throughout the 1800s. And so just get used to it. We're going to talk about causes and effects and the realities of all those panics for the next, 100 years, really. Okay, now, there is a worksheet that says something about the Erie Canal. Right? I love the New York documentary, as my sophomores know. And I would like to show you a clip. This is not a normal video sheet. This is you watch it, and then you see if you can figure out what are the answers to the questions. You might even know some of the answers to the questions now. If you do, go ahead and write them down. I'm fine with that. No, so see where it has Garrett, you've got it out there. What's the top say? Yeah, it says interpretive commentary thinking skills or something like that. Improving interpretive commentary skills. Yeah. Well, maybe we could do that if I put in the right disc. What do you think about that? Got to put in the right disc, Mr. Beavers. Mr. Beavers, this is going on your evaluation at the end of the year. You know you get to evaluate me at the end of each semester. And it's anonymous. And one person last year said that Mr. Beavers is hypocritical because the rules that he has for his students he does not apply to himself. So that was fun. But you can be as honest as you want, and you can get away with it because it's all anonymous. If you want to take me down, you can say all sorts of stuff. Please don't. Please don't. And I might give you a donut. Okay, Erie Canal coming right up. Almost certainly this is on.
On the Atlantic seaboard, but a larger,
Three, efficient, it makes it easy.
that somehow the Indian 363-mile-long ditch, that somehow the Indian tribes that lived here have put down pavement.
That great plan indicated to people who.
This first part was talking about the New York City grid. The lower part of Manhattan is very like, but the rest of it is very much gridded. So,
that was real.
and they're wrapping that up now.
That was self-fulfilling. You lay out a straight plan like that, and the next thing you know, someone's bought a corner lot. And the transportation followed. It wasn't long before you had horse-drawn trolleys.
The Commissioner's Plan of 1811 was one of the most far-sighted urban visions ever conceived. And yet its audacity was nothing compared to that of another proposal DeWitt Clinton put forward that same year. Not an 8-foot map, but a 363-mile-long ditch that, if completed, would transform forever New York's relation to the entire American continent.
When you think of the United States in 1800, it's really a country that's huddled along the East Coast. Movement to the interior of the North American continent is blocked by what we no longer think is of substantial mountain chains, the Appalachians, the Alleghanies. But from the perspective of 1800, they were impressive indeed. There were no blasted highways through there. There were no railroads through there. There were no rivers that took you easily through there. You had to walk up those mountains and walk down them and then up another one and down. So they were a formidable barrier. And what we had to do, both in New York and in the nation, is to figure out a way to get inside the continent.
For years, New York merchants had been dreaming of the immense wealth locked in the continent's interior. In 1811, DeWitt Clinton came up with a way of getting at it. If nature had provided them no river to the west, New Yorkers would simply have to build one.
When one looks at a map of the United States and one looks at the Mississippi River, one cannot but assume that the greatest city in the world is going to be where New Orleans is. That here's one of the greatest river systems in the world. But it didn't happen that way. And it didn't happen that way because New Yorkers took the geographical advantage they had and got access to that agricultural hinterland that seemed to belong to New Orleans.
The only gap in the chain of mountains running from New Hampshire to Georgia is providentially located in New York State. And Governor Clinton had enough sense to see that this was a very valuable asset and to build the Erie Canal over the collective dead bodies of most of the politicians from New York City, who did not see that connecting the Middle West to the Hudson and New York City would turn into a cash cow.
The scope of the project was nothing less than mind-boggling. An artificial waterway, unlike anything undertaken since the days of the ancient Egyptians. At a time when the longest canal in America ran just 27 miles, and most less than 2, Clinton's canal would have to run more than 350 miles across the rugged wilderness of upstate New York. Thomas Jefferson himself rejected the scheme outright, calling it little short of madness. So did the New York State Legislature and President James Madison, who warned that its $5 million cost would bankrupt the federal government. But DeWitt Clinton would not be deterred. The Great Erie Canal, he declared, would make New York one of the most splendid commercial cities on the face of the earth. Appealing directly to the public, he lobbied tirelessly for what his detractors called Clinton's Big Ditch, holding mass rallies in New York City and circulating a petition eventually signed by more than 100,000 New Yorkers. Clinton himself devised an ingenious scheme to pay for it all, using public funds to attract private investors, and showing once and for all how great public works could be built in a democracy.
How did Clinton build the Erie Canal? By promising bankers he would make money if they lent him the funds to do so. And no ideology about it. Jefferson wouldn't dream of having the national government involving itself in an affair of this kind for doctrinal reasons. The Jeffersonians were against internal improvements. Hamilton was all for them, and boy, did they make money.
In 1817,
That guy that was just talking was a very well-known and I think really well-loved senator from New York, Patrick Moynihan, and you could tell he had some personality there. This guy right here, I went to New York City. You see, if you become a social studies teacher, right? Right? Do you know what you want to be in life? Do you know what you want to be? If you don't know what you want to be, think about being a social studies teacher because June and July, Christmas, off, Thanksgiving, pumpkin show, off, right? It's awesome. You have a union and good benefits. You also can apply for all of these things to go places, and they will pay you to go. I went to this thing called the Gilder Lehrman Institute seminar on the Gilded Age in New York City, and he was the main professor there, and I got to learn under him. And now he's on this PBS documentary. Man, it was awesome. It was just so cool. And they paid me like $500. It's a travel stipend, but it was still really cool. Right. The day that I got done with that, I flew out to Los Angeles, paid for also by the federal government this time, to spend 3 weeks in sunny California studying the Constitution, and I got to sit through an earthquake.
Here's what I found.
I got to sit through an earthquake. It was scary. Just saying, social studies teachers, you can't get that if you're a math teacher. Sorry.
in the state of New York, encouraged by Governor DeWitt Clinton, issued what at the time was a staggering indebtedness or issuance of bonds to build this waterway across upstate New York, connecting essentially the Hudson River and Albany with the Great Lakes at Buffalo. That ditch, that 363-mile ditch, only a couple dozen people on it, was the most important public works project in American history until the Interstate Highway Program was passed in 1956.
The canal was dug with Irishman mules and Monongahela whiskey in about 7 years. A massive feat. And you cross the canal, now it's still there, not clean because Lake Erie is clean. And you go about every 15 miles, you come to a town where something extraordinary in manufacturing commercial history began.
It was one of the few public works projects in New York that didn't have a cost overrun, was finished on schedule. In fact, it paid for itself by being partially open before it was fully completed.
On October 26, 1825, 3 full years ahead of schedule, the mammoth undertaking was complete. The Great Erie Canal, one observer said, has defied nature and used it like a toy. With 83 locks and 18 aqueducts, including an 800-foot water bridge over the Genesee River, it was the greatest engineering feat of its day. It had also worked nothing less than an economic miracle. It had once cost more to ship a ton of goods 30 miles inland than all the way to England, and taken more than 3 weeks to move a ton of wheat from Buffalo to New York. Now, it took just 7 days, and the cost had been cut from $100 to less than $6. At the opening celebrations, DeWitt Clinton, the undisputed hero of the day, poured a keg of water drawn from Lake Erie into New York Harbor. The symbolism was lost on no one. All America now met in New York.
The mountains have been leveled. The valleys have been filled. Rivers and gulfs have been formed over them, which will unite the waters of the Hudson and the waters of the Atlantic with the waters of the remote West and constitute a river. The Reverend F.H. Cumming.
It just brought things alive in America as they had never done before. And that canal brought the seaborne Atlantic trade right up into the central of the American Great Plains. It was a way west that only we had, and this harbor was the fulcrum between the great continent and the European world on the other side.
It made New York the only American city that connected Europe on one side with the heartland of the continent on the other. And that has been New York's strength ever since. It still is the major port of entry and transfer point for people flying from Europe to the rest of the country. You see New York and then you see America.
This waterway did so much to pull the nation together. Now the goods from this whole vast region are flowing by canal boats through the Erie Canal and then down the Hudson River to New York City. So the New York City is becoming a kind of national city, pulling the country together. So there isn't one focus. The national capital may be in Washington, but the real economic capital is by common consent in New York.
The Erie Canal made New York the Empire State, and New York City the first real center in America. DeWitt Clinton had first imagined the great metropolis New York might become, and reshaped the geography of an entire continent to make it inevitable. The day the canal opened, he uttered a fateful prediction.
New York will, in course of time, become the granary of the world, the emporium of commerce, the seat of manufactures, the focus of great moneyed operations, and the concentrating point of vast capitals.
Okay. Do you have answers for me? Look. Number, I gotta have it in front of me, sorry, just a second. What effect did the Erie Canal have on the cost of transportation of goods? One word. Decreased. What was the effect of the Erie Canal on the growth of river cities? This was not in either, but it wasn't in those. Did they increase in population or decrease in population? River cities. Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Louisville, what'd you say? Decreased. They decreased in population because goods from Ohio weren't going to go through Louisville. What happened to the Great Lakes cities? They grew in size because of it. New York versus New Orleans. New York what? New York became, not just boom, became the financial capital, even more so than it had been already. And New Orleans lost out. How did the Great Canal contribute to increased sectionalism? Anyone? All right, you read the answer, then I'll go around and see what you think. How did the Erie Canal increase sectionalism? Come around just a minute and see what your answer is. You hear that, Meg, Liliana, Kaylin? Have those questions answered. Okay. Let's